welcome everybody to the Chorlton Good Neighbours History Group, who, as you know, we meet on the usually on the first Thursday of every month, and we've got some several lined up for the next few months, which we'll tell you about at the end. But today we've got Barry Clark, who I knew when we were both at Manchester Metropolitan University, or Manchester Poly as we're familiar with it, and his particular interest has gone off on a historical dimension, which I'd never heard of before, so I'm very interested to hear about it. It's about two bookbinders, father and son, who lived in Chorlton in the early 1900s. And so I know from having looked at a few of them, he's got a lot of slides to show about this. So we're recording this for so people who can't make it today will be able to see it. And if you want to say anything, you'll have to unmute yourself, which is easy enough to do. But I think by and large, Barry would be happy to take questions at the end. But if you've got a really important point you want to make, then sort of put your hand up or unmute yourself and say, I want something to say. So is everybody okay with that? Yep. Okay. Any questions? No, because you're all muted anyway. You can't ask questions. That's the way I like it. Over to you, Barry.
Okay. Thank you, Bernard. Yeah, as Bernard said, Bernard and I met each other years and years ago when we taught at the Poly and MMU. And I'll just tell you a little bit about how I came to the subject matter of today's talk. It is not from work. My background is in public sector, working in public sector management, so it's not any professional interest. And although I've lived in Chorlton 40 or almost 50 years now, it's not because I've got a particular interest in researching Chorlton history, although I am interested in Chorlton history. It came about because I've always been interested in the arts and crafts movement, very much inspired by Ruskin and William Morris. We're talking about 1870s to 1910, that sort of period, the decorative arts and crafts architecture. And I've been collecting books about that. And over the years, I've needed to have one or two repaired. And I've had them done by bookbinders, but it was a very expensive activity to have them bound because it's a very intensive, labor-intensive process. And I'd been looking around for a course on book repair so that I could just do some simple repairs myself. I eventually found that up in a place called Higham Hall, in Bassenthwaite in the Lake District. I did my first bookbinding course in 2010, actually the year I retired from MMU, although that was coincidental. And it was a residential course, 5 days, and within 24 hours, I knew I was hooked. I just actually loved taking books apart and repairing them. And after that, I was looking out more and more for books about bookbinding. So I want to share with you a journey that started for me. Oh, how do I move on to my next one? Oh dear me, nothing's happening. Why is that not moving? Oh, there we go. I don't know what I did then. Oh, there we go. Okay. Is that okay, Bernard? Can you see it?
Yes, I can. Yes, it's fine. It's really good.
I think I'll be okay, Dave. Sorry for that. So this journey I'm going to share with you started here with this book. It's called the Bookbinding Trades Journal. I discovered it in a secondhand bookshop in Carnforth about 7 or 8 years ago now. I'd never heard of the Bookbinding Trades Journal. What drew me was this rather nice arts and craft decoration on it. So this is in the arts and crafts style, and it was bound probably in 1910 because the Bookbinding Trades Journal that is in it dates from 1904 to 1910, probably done by a bookbinder in his own time. There's no mark in there for who did it. But I rather liked it. And when I started looking at the contents, it was a quarterly journal, started in 1904. And the more I looked at it, I liked the contents, But I noticed that it was edited by a man called William Mellor, whose address was Clarence Road, Chorlton, Manchester. That was the contact address. So I was intrigued, living in Chorlton. Anyway, I bought the book, and quite a long journey commenced. And it led me to these two men. William Mellor, the father, is on the left. This is him, aged 52 in 1913. And on the right is his son, also called William Mellor, very confusing. In his adult life, he tended to call himself Will Mellor, so I would call him Will Mellor. Will Mellor, his son, born in 1885, and this is him aged 39 in 1925. So William Mellor and Will Mellor were critical to the bookbinding trades journal, because William Mellor was the editor, and indeed his son Will Mellor did all of the decoration and illustrations. We can see straight away from their dress, these are working men. These are respectable working men. Bookbinding was a profession, or a trade, really, a trade in which you would do a long apprenticeship, a 7-year apprenticeship. Each of them did a 7-year apprenticeship. And these were, and we can see they're in suits, they're in waistcoats, they've got ties. You know, there's not just their Sunday best. Most bookbinders in the trade went to work in suits and shirt and ties. Very different from this man, T.J. Cobden Sanderson, who most people credit with the revival of hand bookbinding in this country. A colleague and a friend of William Morris, he learnt the trade not as an apprentice. Cobden Sanderson actually went to Owens College, Manchester for a while, and Trinity College, Cambridge, trained to be a barrister. And like lots of those people, like William Morris and other people who went to Oxford, chose to have a life in the crafts. Cobden Sanderson didn't do an apprenticeship. He went off and paid to have training with a professional bookbinder, with a trade bookbinder, and after 3 or 4 months thought, right, I can do better than this. And indeed he did do better than that. But look at him, he's so different. He's a different class, he's got a different background, he's got a very different outlook. There he is in his sort of artisan smock and his cravat and his fancy beret. So very different from our men, William Mellor and Will Mellor, who came up as apprentices through the trade. And they lived on Clarence Road. Well, it's now called Claridge Road. It's not that far from where I am in Zetland Road. It's probably not that far from where you are if you're in Chorlton. Clarence Road was renamed, I think, in the 1960s, when Manchester renamed a lot of its roads to avoid 2 roads having the same name. So in the 1960s, I think it was renamed Claridge Road. It's the road that runs along the side of Barbican. If you imagine walking out of Chorlton towards Manchester, you come to Barbican on your left, and the immediate left is Claridge Road. And William Mellor lived at number 1, or was it number 3? I can't remember which. And his son lived next door when he got married. So number 1, number 3, and that side of the road got demolished. And there's this new, well, relatively new 1970s, 1980s block of flats where numbers 1 and 3 Clarence Road were. So that's where they lived. And a lot of the lovely bindings we'll see that Will Mellor developed were actually done whilst he was a resident in Chorlton. But let's go back to William Mellor Senior. He was a self-educated man. He left school at the age of 10. He lived around the sort of cathedral school he went to, around the Ancoach area. He lived around the area where there are now a lot of co-op buildings, the CIS building, the co-op banking building, all those buildings down the bottom there near Victoria. But he got his education mainly through what was the Bennett Street Sunday School. And in those days, of course, before state education, a lot of working people got their education through Sunday schools. And they weren't just active on Sundays, they had lots of evening classes. They organised weekends away and holidays. And they offered primary, secondary education, and indeed prepared some of their kids for university entrance. And William Mellor always says he got his education there, and he got his education. I'm just going to find my pointer to see if that helps at time. Here we go. He also got his education from the Ancoach Brotherhood. So he's living on the edge of Ancoach there. And indeed, the Bennett Street Sunday School was attached to St Paul's Church, which was also around that bit of Ancoach near the Oldham Road. But there was also the Ancoach Brotherhood that had been set up by a very active Labour councillor, Charles Rowley, in Manchester, who was a mover and shaker on lots of things in Manchester. But Charles Rowley had set up the Ancoach Brotherhood, which ran a whole range of activities in Ancoach: music evenings, lectures, there were cycling clubs, there was all sorts of things. And he brought very important people to Manchester, including William Morris, who used to come every year to give a lecture to the Ancoach Brotherhood. And William Mellor Senior certainly met William Morris during this time. And he said this was really his secondary education was through the Ancoach Brotherhood. And indeed, he won a scholarship to Ruskin College, Oxford during this time. And he gets a job as a trainee, as an apprentice bookbinder, a 7-year apprenticeship, which he completed in 1881. And he was rising up through the trade, and he became a foreman. And just a couple of little things here. On the left here is the book, came out not that long ago, about Bennett Street Sunday School. The front cover, of course, is a painting by Lowry, and indeed he himself attended Bennett Street Sunday School. And on the right, we've got one of the advertising leaflets of the Ancoach Brotherhood, arts and crafts style, probably designed by Walter Crane, who was a friend of William Morris, a friend of Cobden Sanderson, the bookbinder I mentioned, and also a friend of Charles Rowley. We'll come back to Walter Crane, one of the important members of the arts and crafts movement. Bennett Street Sunday School, one of the activities they had there was a literature society. Here it is at the bottom here, the St Paul's, that was the church, the St Paul's Literary and Educational Society. And they had meetings, they had talks from a whole range of people. They had meetings about local issues and national issues. And they ran this manuscript journal. I had never come across a manuscript magazine in the sense that people wrote their articles by longhand directly in this very, very large ledger. And the whole run, it ran from, I think, about the 1860s through to the 1960s. And the complete run is held at Manchester Central Reference Library, which is where I saw this. And quite early on, William Mellor, the father, and Will Mellor, his son, wrote a joint piece in here. So it was a pilgrimage to Kelmscott Manor. William Mellor and Will Mellor, I don't know if they walked, they certainly walked part of the way, but they did a pilgrimage together to visit William Morris's house in the North Cotswolds. William Morris, of course, well dead. William Morris had died, I think, in 1896, I think 10 years before. But they travelled on this pilgrimage, first of all to Kelmscott Manor, and later on they moved on to London together to visit Kelmscott House, which is where Morris lived in London. But the thing is, they jointly wrote this. So this is written and illustrated by Will Mellor Jr. Very early on, in almost everything he did, he found some way of putting his initials in. So that's a rather stylized WM. And there it is at the bottom again there, bottom corners. So William Mellor Senior wrote the article, and his son, who at this time would have been about age 19, did all these beautiful illustrations. And if one actually sees it in person, it's lovely because this is written directly on the page. No chance for making mistakes. Lovely pen and ink drawings. But it's 6 or 7 pages. And that's there's WM again. There's Will Mellor's drawing of William Morris's grave. So they worked on the bookbinding trades journal together. It was launched in 1904, so here we are. So as well as rising up through the trade, William Mellor Senior was rising up through his trade union. He was very active in the Manchester branch. He held almost all of the different positions of chairman, secretary, treasurer, etc., etc. Very active in the National Union, which was the National Union of Bookbinders and Machine Rulers. And he proposed to the National Union that we really ought to have a journal, because there was no journal on bookbinding at all at that time. There had been one earlier that folded, a commercial journal that folded, I'm just checking my notes, about 1894, that's right. And Will Mellor said, in his own words, it's somewhat strange that an ancient and beautiful craft like that of bookbinding should be without a literary journal devoted to the promotion of its interests. Well, the National Union said, yeah, that's a great idea, William. Why don't you edit it and run it? So he did. And it started in 1904 and it ran through to 1914. At the same time, he was very active in wider trade union and Labour Party matters. Of course, this was the time of the growth of socialist organisations in Manchester, as well as elsewhere, of course. And he joined the Independent Labour Party, and he was a founder member of the Manchester Labour Representation Committee. He went on to be, and I'll mention this in a moment, to be a councillor for Manchester City Council. At the same time, he was also secretary of the Manchester and Salford Trades Council, which is the coordinating body for the different trade unions in Manchester and Salford. Initially, it was a part-time post, but he later gave up his bookbinding work and became a full-time official for the Manchester and Salford Trades Council. He was also active in forming what was actually the very first Tenants' Defence League in the country in 1915. So he's very active, and here's just picking up on the bookbinding trades journal. So his son Will Mellor did all of the illustrations. This is the very first volume here, this one on the left, quite an intricate design by his son. There's probably a WM there somewhere. Then another one was this one, volume 2, number 1, a simplified one. There's a W down there and an M over there. And then he did another one here. I can't find it. There's the WM over there. So that was the bookbinding trades journal. And they wrote up again for the bookbinding trades journal, which of course was a printed quarterly journal that was distributed free to all of the members of the bookbinding consolidated trades union. I'm not sure how many thousands of people that was, but in effect, everyone who worked in the trade would have been a member of the trade union, and they all got this quarterly journal free of charge. And it's packed full of material, not only about bookbinding and not only about bookbinding in this country, it's very good on covering European developments. And there's lots of trade union news and reports from the different branches, but there are always book reviews. There was always sort of a literary column, and there was often articles about different places of interest. And so William Mellor and Will Mellor published their pilgrimage to Kelmscott in the Trades Journal, actually with different illustrations. So here, that was a few. I'd say William Mellor was secretary of Manchester Salford Trades Council. Who does he get to do the letterhead with his son? And we've got a W there and an M. I must admit, this confused me in my early days of research, because what's this doing here? 3 Clarion Street, Albert Square, Manchester. And I thought, are they putting in his home address in Chorlton and the office address? And it turns out that there is a Clarence Street just off Albert Square. So what a weird coincidence that he works in Clarence Street, but he lived in Clarence Road. So there's the Trades Council headed paper. So I'm racing through this so I can get to some of the more interesting bits of, well, the more attractive documents from his son. So William Mellor, going from strength to strength, they were living in Moston at the time, which was much more rural there then than it was now. And he was elected a councillor in 1916 and continued through to his death in 1934. He died, what about, it's only in his late 50s, I think. Yes, yeah, 55-ish. He was also a JP. He was very active councillor, and apparently he was particularly active on baths, wash houses, and early council housing. A great advocate of early council housing. One of his colleagues here described him as having a kind disposition, human feeling, and a strong sense of justice. Another one said a quiet, unostentatious, almost reserved man. Charles Rowley, another Labour councillor, asserted that in his autobiography, Rowley's autobiography, said about William Mellor, he would make an excellent Labour MP, for he's one of the sanest, clearest speakers, besides being a hard worker. It's not that difficult, I found, once I was starting my research, to find much on William Mellor. Seemed not that difficult at all, because he was such an active trade unionist and such an important figure in the Labour movement around the turn of that century. There's a fair bit about him, and some of you will know the work of Ruth and Eddie Frow, whose working class movement library is now based in Salford. They wrote about William Mellor, so it's not too difficult to find things about William Mellor. But I'm now going to move on to his son, Will Mellor, and that was the first problem, because some of the stuff I was finding, I realized was wrong, because people conflated the two people. Not surprising, same name, both bookbinders by apprenticeship, both in Manchester. Perhaps not surprising, but I'm now looking more at Will Mellor, his son, born in 1885. There was a sister born later, but she died in her teenage years. So his mother was also in the bookbinding trade. Around this time, actually, there were more women employed in the bookbinding trade than there were men. But they were only allowed to do the preliminary work. So women were employed to do the paper folding to create what are called sections, which are then sewn. And women, of course, did all the sewing. They weren't permitted to take up apprenticeships, and they weren't permitted to continue with other aspects of the trade. And that's what Will Mellor's mother did. She was a folder and a stitcher in the trade. So it's not surprising, perhaps, with Dad so active as well, that Will was apprenticed to be a bookbinder quite soon. And his apprenticeship lasted 7 years. And whilst he was an apprentice, he studied at both Manchester School of Art and the, what became UMIST. I'm trying to remember, I think it was called Manchester Technical School at the time. Can't find the exact reference at the moment. So he studied at the School of Art and at Manchester Technical School, which ran bookbinding classes, lettering, calligraphy classes, printing crafts, and he would have done evening classes there. Now, Walter Crane, I mentioned earlier, Walter Crane, was a very important national figure in the arts and crafts movement, was a friend of Charles Rowley, and Charles Rowley persuaded Walter Crane to come to Manchester. Walter Crane wouldn't accept a full-time post to be the director of the School of Art, but he did accept a post to be a part-time head of design. And he came, I think, 1 week every month for 3 years. Very influential figure in in developing craft education at that time. And one of the things he proposed was that there ought to be a decent museum on site so that students could actually learn from the best craft and design work that was around. So not only learn by lectures and by doing, but they should also learn by seeing and observing. So Will Mellor was too late to be taught by Walter Crane, but he did benefit from this museum that was set up within the School of Art. It was open to the public as well. It was the first major arts and crafts museum in the country. And in the collections, for example, is this. This is a book that Will Mellor would have seen, would have been influenced by, and we'll see how it influenced his own work in a moment. This is actually a book by Cobden Sanderson. He wrote this book. It's called Ecce Mundus. It's a book, a short book by Cobden Sanderson about what he called the ideal book, about the way it should be designed, the way it should be printed. And most of the copies were just rather ordinary paper covered copies. This version, Cobden Sanderson bound himself. So this is a really full-on arts and crafts design. Each of these, this is gold foil, a gold leaf, real gold leaf, and each of these marks would be done by a different tool. So that flower wouldn't be one large tool. It would have done once, twice, three, and you see there are different sizes, and that would have been a different tool. That would have been a different tool. 2 dots, different tools. You can imagine the number of markings that have to be done. It's an exquisite piece of work. And Will Mellor will have seen this. Cobden Sanderson, of course, got another Manchester connection in the sense that he married Annie Cobden, one of the daughters of Richard Cobden, the Manchester MP and anti-Corn Law man. Will Mellor will also have seen this binding by Catherine Adams, one of the best arts and crafts bookbinders in the country, based in the Cotswolds. This is vellum cover. This was a full leather, brown leather, goat skin was the main leather used. This is vellum, cream colour, decorated in gold and with colours, although some of the colour is lifting. Some of the colour's been lost now. There's the spine in a bit more detail, and there's the inside cover, what are called the turn-ins, with a really lovely decoration, and we can see the colour better there because, of course, that won't have seen the light very much. So Will Mellor would have been influenced by this work, and he excelled at the School of Art. He was there between, just got to check the dates, about 1904 and 1909. He completed his apprenticeship, I think, in 1908, evening classes, as I say. And from the beginning, he was winning prizes within the School of Art, but also at national level. The Board of Education ran national competitions for students at schools of art, and he was winning national competitions for his book bindings, for his calligraphy, for what's called illuminated lettering, which I'll show you in a moment. And often the prize was free subscriptions for the following year's tuition. So it's a very, very, very worthwhile prizes. So at the end of his very first year as a part-time student doing evenings, he entered a lot of work in an exhibition in Manchester at the Athenaeum in 1904, which was the Clarion Guild of Handicraft. Now, a lot of people know of the Clarion newspaper run by Robert Blatchford, based in Manchester. And of course, there were lots of activities associated with the newspaper, most well known, of course, the Clarion cycling clubs, but lots of other activities. And one of them was the Clarion Guilds of Handicraft, which were set up all around the country. And they had 4 or 5 national exhibitions. And the 1904 one was held in Manchester. And Will Mellor, this is 1904, so he was 18 years of age, just at the end of his first year of evening classes, as well as doing his apprenticeship. Will Mellor exhibits a variety of work that gets picked up nationally. So some of you may well have heard of the Studio magazine, the premier arts and crafts magazine of the day. The Studio magazine picked up his work from this exhibition. So we're able to see here 2 book plates that he designed. And this one here, I don't know who F.W. Bradley or Alec Hepburn were, but the one for Alec Hepburn is very much a bookbinder's workshop. This is a sewing frame here. Of course, almost all bookbinding was done by candlelight and by lantern light. So 2 book plates he designed, possibly for fellow students. That was in the Studio magazine. This is his pen and ink work, sort of calligraphy type things. This was in a national magazine called the Art Workers Quarterly. And there's a lot more of it. Some of this would have been in colour, but unfortunately, of course, everything was black and white illustration then. And here he did Mum and Dad's Christmas card. And we can see in 1904, they were still living in Moston, 55 Moston Lane. I suspect that was in colour. These were illuminated manuscripts. So these would have been in full colour. And I think we'd lose a lot by only seeing them in black and white. Will Mellor is choosing a lot of things written by William Morris. So we know, where he's coming from, both politically and aesthetically. This was something by Morris called A Garden by the Sea. So all this would have been, a capital letter in colour. This all would have been in colour. This is a sort of floral decoration. There's 2 more. That's something from Twelfth Night. Not quite sure where that's from. By Robert Louis Stevenson, is it? There it is. And there's another one. William Morris words. This one I found in an arts and crafts magazine published in America in 1905 or 1906. So his work was getting picked up in a lot of not just national, but indeed international publications, which is quite surprising. And then, of course, what he did, he entered some of his hand bindings. Here's another interesting link. This is Ecce Mundus again, this Cobden Sanderson book, little booklet really, about what Cobden Sanderson thought made the ideal book in terms of its printing. A book that Will Mellor handled himself in terms of that beautiful full leather gold illustrated book in the Arts and Crafts Museum at the School of Art. So he bound a copy himself, and this was his design. And we have to rely on the description because, of course, it's illustrated in black and white, but the description said that it was probably the best book he exhibited, and it was maroon Morocco. And Morocco is another word for meaning goat skin. So maroon goat skin, and it's decorated in gold leaf. So this is gold leaf. Again, all of these individual little tools, and each line is an individual tool. So that was Ecce Mundus. And he exhibited 2 other books. And we get Charles Rowley again, because Charles Rowley, these are books by Charles Rowley, called A Brotherhood Treasury. Charles Rowley had published 3 or 4 little booklets of similar titles, which were full of writings and uplifting sayings that might be inspiring to working men and women. It's all part of that education of the working classes. Lovely little booklets. And Will Mellor bound these. This is one version here. We're told it's in blue Morocco, so it's blue goat skin, gold tooled. So this decoration is called tooling, brass tools, indenting gold leaf. And this one is in green Morocco, so it's green leather, with inlaid vellum panels. The Arts and Crafts bookbinders revived the use of vellum, which is calf skin. And sometimes it was used as instead of leather, instead of the, the whole bit of leather, or sometimes it was used as here, as a decorative panel onto which we can barely see it, can we? Beautiful decoration of flowers and leaves. It says it's tooled in colours and gold. The description in this journal said, it's interesting chiefly on account of a somewhat original scheme of tooling. The volume has a very rich appearance, bound in green morocco, inlaid with vellum panels, and tooled in gold and colours. The flowers were in blue, the stems and leaves in dark and light green, and the lettering, hearts and dots, in gold. Well, a black and white illustration doesn't really do it justice. But a stroke of luck, isn't the internet wonderful on occasions? Through my library membership, I was able to log on to the Central Reference Library and go through all of the newspapers of the time just by using a few keywords. It's incredibly fast to find things. But also what I did was to go through the Central Reference Library catalogue itself with the odd keyword. And after lots of trials and errors, I finally found something which I couldn't quite believe. This book here is here. It's actually in the Central Reference Library's collection. So we really can now see what a beautiful piece of work it is. This is the green morocco, green goat skin. Here's the inlaid vellum panel, which of course is a beautiful background to show up this lovely gold lettering and the flowers and the leaves. Not only on the front, but he does the same on the back. And these raised bands here are part of the structure of the book. That's part of its sewing, which is highlighted to be a decorative feature, quite common by the arts and crafts bookbinders. There's the inside, and he often put his initials on what's called the bottom turn-in at the end. So how was this? Well, I researched it a bit more and discovered that in 1952, Will Mellor donated 2 of his bindings to the Central Reference Library, and the library purchased 3 others, which were all added to the collection. So this is one that the library purchased. They've got no record of who they purchased it from, but it appeared in the catalogue at the same year that we do know he donated to. And I have been able to identify now that William Mellor left the Northwest in 1952. So I think what he was doing was clearing a few things out and sold and donated a few things to the Central Reference Library before he moved away, which I'll say a bit more about in a moment. He's a student, a part-time student, evening classes, but as a student, he was actually asked to create the design for a major exhibition on William Morris's work in 1908. So this is designed by Will Mellor, and there's the WM down the bottom there. The following year, so Will Mellor's exhibiting in other places. He exhibited some paintings at the Walker Art Gallery in Liverpool. He exhibited some other work at Manchester Art Gallery. And then in 1908, the School of Art had quite a big exhibition of past students' work. And Will Mellor, sorry, in 1909, an exhibition of past students' work. And Will Mellor exhibited this, called Golden Wings, another William Morris story. This is it illustrated in the Bookbinding Trades Journal. That's the front cover. And the description says the binding is white vellum, tooled in gold, with these lovely floral decoration in colour. And they say the title page, they say, is the capitals are in raised gold. just a big gold leaf on top of gesso so that it stands out. And all of this hand drawn. It's what's called a manuscript book. It's 50 odd pages of vellum, and the whole story has been written by hand by Will Mellor. And I found a reference to this book in the Manchester Guardian in 1958. A little reference which referred to William Mellor, thinking it was William Mellor. They conflated William Mellor Senior and Will Mellor Junior, and basically said that the following day there was going to be a selling auction at Sotheby's of medieval manuscripts, and included in that was a book, Golden Wings, created by William Mellor, the ex-Labour councillor and secretary of Manchester and Salford Trades Council. Well, clearly it wasn't by him, it was by his son. 1958 in an auction at Sotheby's. So I wrote to Sotheby's, said, is there any chance you still have details about this? Have you got the catalogue reference? Could you tell me who put it in for auction, whether it sold, how much? Sotheby's were very good. They responded very quickly and gave me the catalogue description. They didn't really add much to what I knew. They didn't know who put it into auction, but it did sell for £52. And they told me the name of the person they sold it to. And what came to mind was, I don't know if any of you will know this place. It's Chumley Castle, not that far away in Cheshire. It's spelt Cholmondeley, but I think they pronounce it Chumley. So Sotheby's told me that a Lady Chumley purchased this Golden Wings in 1958 from them for the massive sum of £52. Chumley Castle, the gardens are open to the public. So I was able to find an email address. So I emailed Chumley Castle and said, would you mind passing this on to Lady Chumley, because it's a personal email. And I was asking her, did she indeed purchase this and has she still got it? And I got a reply from her secretary saying, yes, indeed. Lady Chumley, who was in her 90s then, did still have the book. She bought it, she did still have it. And indeed, it's one of her prized possessions, and she has it on her bedside cabinet and looks at it most days. So I thought, well, so I wrote again and said, well, any chance of me coming to have a look at it? And they said, yes. And when I got there, I said, is there any chance of you letting me take a picture of it? So I'm afraid these were my own poor efforts, sort of on the hoof, because I really wasn't expecting her to let me do this. So here we can see it. It's got its green silk ties running through cut through to the vellum. So they are structural, they hold the book together. This is the vellum, this is the gold tooling. And now we can start to see some of the beautiful colouring. And then there it is opened up. And then the title page, which was described as titles in raised gold, miniatures and borders in gold and colours. I just think that is absolutely beautiful. So this is the raised gold. So it's gesso, which is a sort of a plaster really, that is applied very carefully to give it a raised area. And then the gold leaf is attached to that, and that gets burnished to give it a shine. It's called rubricated when they use red, and they often use red for initial letters. There's a dropped initial letter in gold, all done by hand. And look at all this exquisite drawing. I think it's amazing. So this is a manuscript book. Will Mellor did the whole thing. I didn't photograph every page. It's 50 odd pages. It's a huge book. Well, it's not huge, but there's 50 odd pages. We're getting near the end of the book there. It brings a bit more colour in. And then I want to show you on the right-hand side, in a bit more detail, what's called the colophon. At the end of books, quite often, we find out a bit more about the making of the book or the printing, but not printing in this case, because there it is in detail. this book, its writing, gilding, design, illumination and binding is entirely the work of the hand of Will Mellor, finished in Manchester on the 15th day of March in the year 1908. A beautiful piece of work, probably the last piece of work he did when he was a student at the School of Art and the Technical School. Lady Chumley died not long after I'd visited, and I left at a reasonable period of time and wrote what I thought was a sensitive letter to her son, Lord Chumley, who lives in Houghton Hall in Norfolk. They've got many great estates, saying, now that your mum's passed away, I wonder if you might be interested in selling the book. But he said, well, nice of you to ask, but no, it's something mum read to us as kids. It's quite a prized family possession. But there you go. During this time, this is 1909. He finished this book in 1908, exhibited in 1909. But during this time, from about 1905 onwards, Will Mellor was secretary of something called the Northern Art Workers Guild, which was an arts and crafts association in Manchester. I'm going to move on quite quickly because I can see time's running on. He was the secretary from 1905. Here he is. This is their annual brochure telling you the lecture programme for the year, for the next year. Here's Will as secretary, Clarence Road. His joint secretary lived on Albany Road, alongside Morrison's. One of these, I think it's Charles Bishop, I think it might have been him, lived on Brundritts Road. It's quite a few of them lived in Chorlton. Here's the programme of lectures. Will's now secretary, so he makes sure he invites Douglas Cockerell, who along with Cobden Sanderson was the other second most important person in reviving hand bookbinding in this country. These guest lecturers who came from London, Charles Rennie Mackintosh came to Manchester to speak to the group. People came from all over. May Morris came, Jesse King, the Glasgow illustrator, came, and they were all asked to sign into a visitor's book. Well, it was sheets of paper, really. But Will Mellor, when he became secretary, he created those pages into a book. We can see something very similar here, can't we? It's vellum, it's silk ties, decorated, beautiful coloured floral decoration in a bit more detail. That's the back. That's the first page. Will donated this to the Central Reference Library, so it's ours. You can go and look at it, and when you do look at it, you can see, you probably can only see something very faint there. They're pencil marks where it seems not to have finished it. The Northern Art Workers Guild had 3 major exhibitions, 2 before Will Mellor was a member, but he got the catalogues and he bound them together in this for his own use. So maroon Morocco, so a full leather binder with gold tooling. Bit more detail. That's the back. He redesigned the rules for the Northern Art Workers Guild in a nice format. There they are. Then the 3rd exhibition was in 1911, and Will Mellor was the secretary at that time. He continued to be the secretary until the Northern Art Workers Guild folded in 1912. And they had an exhibition of their work as part of a bigger exhibition at Manchester Art Gallery, an exhibition of drawings. And their bit, the Northern Art Workers Guild, was the examples of craftsmanship. And Will Mellor offered to do for free the design for the cover. And this is the cover. This is the page further in, which announced the start of the part of the catalogue related to the Northern Art Workers Guild. Will exhibited lots of pieces of work there. He exhibited this binding. This is another one he donated to the Central Reference Library. Maroon Morocco. Look at this. This is what libraries do, isn't it? They damage beautiful books by putting class marks on them. And there's another one, very similar style. So he donated these 2 in 1952. during all of this period, we're talking 1904, that's 1911, he was illustrating the Bookbinding Trades Journal. Hundreds of illustrations in there, and I've just picked out a few. Here's one that he did for an article that someone had written there about bookbinding at Birmingham School of Art. So he did a nice drawing, pen and ink drawing of a bindery. So here's a sewing frame. Here's a press here. Here's what's called a laying press. This is a lithographic stone where the binder would pare the leather. His dad wrote an article about John Rylands, so there's an illustration for that. They always had a gossip about Manchester, something going on in Manchester. So these are different headers that he did. He did lots of them. That takes us up to about 1910. The Bookbinding Trades Journal folded in 1914 at the start of the war, and Will Mellor was in the First World War. He went to France as a cartographer, as a draftsman, probably doing maps in France. Came out relatively unscathed, came back to Manchester. The 1911 census says that he was self-employed. So I think he was still self-employed. I don't think he went into the trade as a bookbinder. He wrote articles for this Manchester-based Journal of Decorative Art. There's quite a few articles he wrote there. He did more illuminated manuscripts when he was commissioned to do so. He was also recruited as a part-time tutor at Manchester School of Art. So he went back as a part-time tutor, possibly in calligraphy, possibly in bookbinding. But I also think he did a lot of sign writing. It seemed when he was self-employed, he was doing a lot of what we would now call advertising, graphic design. And here was a stamp he did for the Master Painters, an exhibition, I think 1923. And in 1925, he took up a full-time post with the Manchester, the Federation of Master Painters, Painters and Decorators. He took up the post of General Secretary, and it was based in Manchester. And that was in 1925. And he was the full-time General Secretary. And from what I can tell, he hardly did any calligraphy or binding after that. He was a full-time General Secretary. He was married by then and can't really trace much more of his work. So I think he was a full-time administrator. Stayed in Manchester. Well, he stayed in Manchester. He's in Clarence Road from 1905, 1906, certainly through to beyond the 1921 census. By the 1930s, I've traced him to Southport with his wife, and his mum came to live with them after his father died. And his wife died early in 1944, the same year that Will Mellor retired. There was a bit of a fracas, and I think he was forced out by some split within the Master Painters. So he retired in 1944 at the age of 59. So he's in Southport by then in 1944. His mum lives on to 1952, and that's when he donates and sells stuff to Central Reference Library. And I next find him in 1958 when his will was written. A friend of mine does family history research, and I don't know how she did it, but she managed to trace his will, and I got a copy of his will from 1958. And then he was living in a hotel in Bristol. And then he died in 1966 when he was living in a hotel in Torquay. And I think it wasn't uncommon for older single men without family, to live in hotels if they could afford it. I suppose an early form of private residential care. And I don't know how he could afford it, but he did, and he still left £5,000 in 1966. And his will said he wanted to be cremated at Manchester Crematorium, along with where his wife had been. So down the road in Barlymore Road, at the crematorium, Will Mellor was cremated in 1966. And in a way, the story sort of ends there. All of these things are owned by us. These are all at Manchester Central Reference Library, which you can view by appointment. The other fine bindings I showed you are in the MMU's special collections, which are also available to view. All created, not all created, but certainly a lot of it created whilst Will Mellor was resident at number 1 and number 3 Clarence Road, now Clarence Road. I'm just about to finish, Bernard, because I'm sure you're thinking I'm tight for time. I've got one little postscript, and that was in the first year of, I've written some articles about William and Will Mellor. The first year of lockdowns, I got an email from someone in Canada and said, I do family history on my grandmother, Betty Sandiford. And I think there's a Will Mellor connection. But there was, because Betty Sandiford married Will Mellor's brother-in-law. So Will Mellor's wife had 3 sisters and a brother. The brother married Betty, can't remember what her first name was, her surname was before they married. They married, and at the time of the 1911 census, they were living with Will Mellor and his wife on Clarence Road. And very soon after that, they emigrated to Canada. Her brother, I mean, Will Mellor's wife and the family were Bolton cotton operatives. But the brother went to Manchester University, trained to be a teacher, emigrated to Canada and became a professor of education in Canada. And this person was researching Betty Sandiford. And after a little bit of correspondence, she said, you know what? That makes sense, because we have a painting by Will Mellor in the family, and it's signed on the back, Will Mellor, August 1913, Clarence Road, Chorlton, Hardy, Manchester. And this is now in Canada. So it's very much of that Edwardian period, a bit like sort of Arthur Ransom. So I knew he had done paintings, but I certainly hadn't traced any. And it's rather nice to at least have it in colour. So I probably gave that to Betty Sandiford when perhaps they were leaving for Canada. But there we go. I'll finish on a modern picture of Clarence Road. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, Barry. That was really, really good. You can unmute everybody, by the way, now. Well done, Barry. I thought that was a really, really well-researched and interesting talk that you gave. I must admit, when I saw it was about two bookbinders, I thought, what are you going to talk about for the rest of the program? But there was no lack of information, was there? It was really, really very interesting, and the artwork I thought was superb that they did, absolutely superb. Anyway, anybody got any questions or comments? Just chip in if you can. Yeah, Jane?
I just wanted to echo, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just wanted to echo what you said, Bernard. I thought that was really lovely talk. It was such richly illustrated and so well researched. It was really enlightening. And I'd never heard about the Ancoach Brotherhood and the William Morris connection, so I thought that was really good. And if you do know any more about the Ancoach Brotherhood, it would, you know, be interesting to hear about it. But just to say, I was really sorry that I missed your talk at the Arts Festival. So it's really good to have another opportunity to have listened to it. So thanks very much for that.
Right. Anybody else with any comments?
Can I just say, Barry, it's interesting, isn't it, when you see the wording, like in today's society, because we have Word and all the tools, everything's centralized. Whereas in those, the written on the velum, even names were split up, weren't they? And big long words were sort of cut in half. And it's just something we would not do now today, would we?
That's right. Yeah.
I think we've all still got a lot to learn how you actually do the bookbinding as well.
Yeah.
Maybe that's another lecture. Philip.
Yes, just about the magazine, or whatever you call it, that was hand printed, hand written. Surely you can only have one copy of that.
Yes, I think so. I mean, at a later stage, I think it probably was printed. But you're quite right. And I mean, they're thick books. They're that thick, and they're big. They're bigger than A4. They're big tomes. That's right. I was astonished that the idea was that it would improve people's the quality of their writing in both ways, both in terms of how they wrote and indeed the neatness of their writing. So I think it was meant to be as a developmental thing anyway. But you're quite right. I presume it was just consulted and read at the classes when they met. Yeah.
Well, certainly, I think in Victorian times, I don't know if anybody's got an old deeds of their house from a Victorian house, but the standard of writing was amazingly good for those things, because there was so much important handwriting that it had to be good quality. I think if we tried to do something like that nowadays, we'd be a bit stuck.
At our stationery shop here on Upper Chorlton Road, we commissioned postcards from Mr. Clark.
Right.
I've got one or two of them.
Fascinating. Now, on the second question in the chat, which is, why do you think he's not well known? He's clearly so talented. The reality is, all of the work that I've shown you, he did when he was a student. Almost all of it, apart from, you know, the later work from about 1909 onwards, which was sort of graphic design work. There's a lot of that to be found, but of course it's anonymous, isn't it? Advertising, etc. He did a lot of sign writing, but all of the beautiful work of calligraphy and the blinds, he did whilst he was a student. In a way, he didn't practice the craft, although he was apprenticed and he won all these awards. So I actually think, I mean, what brings him to attention, of course, is the fact that he's in this, he did all the illustrations for the bookbinders journal. I suspect there are lots of other people who are undiscovered at Birmingham School of Art and Lincoln School of Art and other people who did really good work at that time, and they did it as students, as apprentices, and moved on. So he probably wasn't unique. But what is unique is the connection with his father and the bookbinding trades journal, and also, yeah, the quality of his work. I mean, it does stand out, yeah.
Okay, any other comments? No? Well, I think we'll leave it there. And as Barry's agreed, this is being recorded, so I'll edit it down and put it on YouTube for people who've not been able to make it, or if you want to go through it again to get some of the details, because I think